I've spent 27 years working in the morgue at Santa Maria della Misericordia Hospital in Rome. 27 years touching cold bodies. 27 years witnessing the most intimate and least romantic moment of death. My name is Marco Ricci. I'm 52 years old. And if there's one thing this job has taught me, it's that death is democratic, technical, and absolutely predictable. Or at least that's what I thought until that spring morning in April 2006. I'm about to share something I've kept to myself for almost 2 decades now. Something that fundamentally changed how I view life, death, and everything that might exist in between. I wonder, where are you watching this from? If you're finding this story meaningful, consider subscribing to join our community of seekers. We share stories that strengthen faith and connect us with saints of our time. When I entered the preparation room that morning, the air had that peculiar density that only those of us who work with death know intimately. It's not exactly a smell, although smell is certainly present. It's more like an atmosphere, an absence of life that you can feel on your skin. I had received the notification the previous evening. A young man of 15, fulminant leukemia, passed away in the early hours. Cases like this are always difficult for families, but for me, after so much time, they had become part of the routine. Young, elderly, men, women. In the end, they're all bodies that need to be prepared with dignity and professionalism. I put on my uniform with the automatic movements that come with habit: latex gloves, disposable gown, mask. I checked the instruments on the metal tray: scissors, forceps, cotton, formaldehyde, suture needles, everything in its place as always. I opened the refrigeration chamber door and verified the number on the tag. Chamber 5. There was the body, covered with a standard white hospital sheet. I pushed the gurney toward the preparation room. The wheels squeaked slightly against the white-tiled floor, a sound I had heard thousands of times, as familiar as my own breathing. I positioned the gurney under the halogen lights, adjusted the height to my working measure, and took a deep breath. Another day, another procedure, that was all. Before removing the sheet, I reviewed the file. Carlo Acutis, 15 years old, born in London, resident in Milan. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, type M3. Late diagnosis, rapid progression. Death at 4:25 in the morning. Cause of death, cerebral hemorrhage resulting from leukemia. Clinical data, cold, precise. The story summarized in medical terms that I had read hundreds of times in different files. What caught my attention was a handwritten note in the margin by the attending physician. Family requests special care in preparation. The young man was deeply devout. Possible visit from ecclesiastical authorities. It wasn't common, but neither was it extraordinary. Some religious families asked for special considerations. We always respected them. Our work was technical, but also human. I set the file aside and finally, as I had done thousands of times before, removed the sheet. The first thing I noticed was his face. There's something in the faces of the dead that makes them immediately recognizable as such. An absence, a lack of muscle tension, a void. But this face was different. I cannot explain it with technical precision because there was nothing technically different. His eyes were closed, his mouth relaxed, his skin pale as is appropriate after death. And yet, there was something, a serenity that went beyond simple post-mortem relaxation. He seemed asleep, yes, but not in that heavy, definitive way of the dead. He seemed to be resting. I shook my head. Sentimentality, I told myself. After so many years, one would think I'd be immune to these subjective impressions, but cases involving young people always stirred something, no matter how professional I tried to be. I continued with my visual inspection. The body was dressed in a hospital gown. I would need to remove it to begin the preparation process, I mentally noted. Thin build, approximate height of 1.75 meter. Visible signs of the illness in the extreme pallor, but curiously without the emaciated appearance typical of patients with advanced leukemia. I placed my hands on the edges of the gurney, mentally preparing myself to begin. This was always the moment of first contact. After so many years, I had developed a sort of mental protocol, reminding myself that it was a body, a biological vehicle that had stopped functioning, that my job was to treat it with dignity and professionalism, that it was no different from any other technical procedure I performed. I extended my right hand toward his shoulder. I needed to slightly raise the body to remove the hospital gown. It's a standard movement, something I had done countless times. My hand, covered by the latex glove, approached his right shoulder, and then I touched him. I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment without sounding completely irrational. I've touched thousands of bodies, thousands. I know exactly what to expect. Coldness, rigidity in various degrees depending on the time elapsed, the particular texture of skin without blood circulation. That unmistakable sensation of inert matter is something you recognize instantly, information that your hands send to your brain without needing to think about it. This is dead. But when my fingers rested on Carlo Acutis' shoulder, my brain received contradictory information. The temperature was as expected, cold. The body had been refrigerated for hours. That was fine. It was correct. But there was something more, something I couldn't categorize with my professional experience. It wasn't physical warmth. Definitely not. It was something else, a kind of presence, density. I can't find the right word. It was as if the body was cold, but not empty, as if there was still something there, something that shouldn't be there. I withdrew my hand instinctively, as if I had been burned. I stared at my own gloved hand, confused. What the hell had that been? I breathed deeply. Come on, Marco, I told myself. It's 5 in the morning. You've barely slept 4 hours. It's a young boy, and that always affects you more than you want to admit. Focus. I extended my hand again, this time with more determination. I placed it again on his shoulder and maintained contact. I counted to 10, breathing slowly, expecting the initial sensation to dissipate and be replaced by the familiar, objective sensations I knew. But it didn't dissipate. If anything, it intensified. There was a stillness in that body that wasn't the stillness of death. Death has its own quality, its own sensory signature. After 27 years, I recognize it immediately. Its absence, its emptiness, it's the end. But this was different. This was peace. Active peace, if that makes any sense. As if the body was resting, not absent. As if there was someone sleeping deeply, not someone who had ceased to exist. If you're finding this story meaningful, I'd love to know what part of the world you're watching from. Please comment below and join our community by subscribing. Your support helps us share more stories like this one that connect us with extraordinary lives that continue to impact us today. I slid my hand from his shoulder down his arm, feeling through the glove the texture of his skin, smooth, soft, without the typical spots of post-mortem blood accumulation in the declining areas. That was technically notable. Cadaveric lividity should have been more evident. I continued toward his hand. I took it between mine, a gesture I had performed thousands of times to verify rigidity and prepare the extremities. His fingers were long, the nails well kept, hands of a boy who had been loved, cared for. And then, holding it between my hands, I felt something that made me close my eyes. It was impossible, irrational, contrary to all my training and experience, but I felt it with a clarity I cannot deny even now, so many years later. I felt as if that cold, immobile hand was holding me back. Not physically, of course. The hand didn't move. There was no pressure, no objective change that could be measured or documented. But something in me, something deeper than my physical perception, registered a response, a presence, a connection. I opened my eyes abruptly and released the hand as if I had received an electric shock. My heart was beating strongly. I could hear it in my ears. This was absurd, completely absurd. I am a man of science, a technician, someone who works with objective facts and standardized procedures. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spiritual presences. I don't believe in anything that cannot be measured, weighed, and verified. And yet, there I was in the middle of my preparation room, with my hands trembling slightly, looking at the body of a 15-year-old boy who had made me feel something that had no name in my professional vocabulary. Before I continue with what happened next, I would like to ask you to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this experience. Have you ever felt something inexplicable that challenged your understanding of reality? Your engagement means the world to our community, and it helps us reach more people who might find comfort in these extraordinary stories. If you're enjoying this account, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more testimonies that strengthen our faith. I walked away from the gurney and went to the sink. I removed my gloves with abrupt movements and turned on the faucet. The cold water ran over my hands. I watched it for a long moment, seeing how it fell and swirled before disappearing down the drain. I breathed deeply several times, trying to recover my professional composure. This was ridiculous. I had just had an emotional reaction, nothing more. Stress, fatigue, the early hour. The fact that he was a teenager, all of that together, had created a subjective experience that my mind had misinterpreted. I dried my hands, took a new pair of gloves, and returned to the gurney with renewed determination. I had a job to do, and I would do it. Without any more nonsense, I began with the standard procedure of undressing the body. I unbuttoned the hospital gown with efficient, professional movements. And as I did so, as my hands touched different parts of his body in the normal course of work, I couldn't help but continue to notice that inexplicable quality. Every time my skin, even through the latex, came into contact with his, there was that something, that presence, that peace. I completely removed the gown and folded it to one side. The body was now fully exposed under the white, cold lights of the room. I proceeded with the detailed visual inspection that was a standard part of my work. I needed to document any marks, wounds, or particularities before beginning the actual preparation. What I saw surprised me again. For a patient who had died of leukemia with hemorrhagic complications, the body was remarkably well preserved. There weren't the extensive discolorations, the ecchymoses, the marks one would expect. The skin, although pale, had a quality almost, I don't want to say healthy, because obviously it wasn't, but there was an integrity to it that was unusual in these circumstances. I began the ritual washing of the body. I took the sponge, moistened it with warm water and antiseptic soap, and began at his forehead. Circular movements, gentle, respectful, from the forehead to the temples, down the cheeks. His face under my hands, and with each pass of the sponge. With each contact, that sensation remained. It didn't diminish. It didn't become familiar. It remained disconcerting. It remained inexplicable. I cleaned his neck, his shoulders, his chest. My hands moved with the practice of thousands of previous procedures, but my mind was in completely uncharted territory. I found myself working with more care than usual, with more delicacy. It's not that I was normally careless, I never was, but there was a difference between standard professional care and this. This was almost reverential. When I washed his arms, when I cleaned each of his fingers individually, when I passed the sponge over his torso and his legs, I couldn't help but think that this wasn't simply a body, or rather, it was a body, technically speaking, objectively speaking, but it was a body that had contained something extraordinary, and in some impossible-to-explain way, something of that still remained. I dried the body with clean towels. The next step was partial embalming, a procedure we performed when the body was expected to be seen by many people or when the burial would be delayed. I prepared the formaldehyde solution. I checked the needles and tubes. This was the most technical, most intrusive moment of the process, the moment when my work became unequivocally invasive, when I had to treat the body as the biological object it technically was. I located the carotid artery. I had made this incision thousands of times. I knew exactly where to cut, how much pressure to apply, how to insert the cannula. My hands didn't tremble. They never trembled during this procedure, but before making the incision, I paused. My hands were on his neck, palpating to locate the exact position, and in that moment, holding them there, I felt something that made me close my eyes again. It wasn't physical. It wasn't something I could explain to a colleague or document in a report, but it was as real as the weight of the scalpel in my hand. It was as if the body, despite being objectively dead, was communicating something. Not words, not clear messages, just a sensation of being all right, of being at peace, of being exactly where it needed to be. I opened my eyes and found tears clouding my vision. I wiped them away roughly with my forearm. What the hell was happening to me? In 27 years, I had never cried in the preparation room, not even with small children, not even with particularly tragic cases. I had learned to maintain that emotional separation necessary to do my job, and now here I was with tears in my eyes. holding a scalpel over the body of a teenager I didn't know, feeling things I couldn't name. I made the incision. My hands moved with the automatic precision of experience. I inserted the cannula, connected the tube, started the flow of embalming fluid, watched as the formaldehyde began to circulate, displacing the remaining blood, infiltrating the tissues. It was a chemical-mechanical process, completely explainable by medical science. And yet, as I worked, as my hands touched his skin to massage and facilitate the distribution of the fluid, I kept feeling that presence, that peace. As if the young man wasn't bothered by what I was doing to his body, as if he understood it was necessary, as if he was, in some impossible way, still there, being a patient witness to my work. I finished the embalming process and sutured the incision with small, neat stitches. The next step was to dress him. According to the notes in the file, the family had brought specific clothing: jeans, a white shirt, athletic shoes, normal clothes, teenage clothes, clothes he had probably worn hundreds of times in life. Dressing a body is always a technical challenge. The rigidity, the inert weight, the lack of natural cooperation that a living person would have, but I did it carefully. Taking my time, I slid his legs into the jeans, fastened the button, pulled up the zipper, passed his arms through the shirt sleeves, buttoning it from bottom to top. I tied his shoes with double bows, as he probably would have done himself. And throughout that process, every time my fingers brushed his skin, every time I moved him, turned him, adjusted him, that sensation remained. It didn't diminish, it didn't become normal. It remained extraordinary. When I finished dressing him, I stepped back a few paces to evaluate my work. He looked good, natural, like a young person asleep, not like a prepared cadaver. There was something in his expression, in the way he lay there, that radiated tranquility. And looking at him, I finally allowed the question I had been avoiding all morning to reach my conscious mind. Who was this boy? I returned to the file and this time read it more carefully. Beyond the medical data, there were notes from the hospital chaplain. Young man of deep faith, extremely devoted to the Eucharist, spent hours in prayer, used technology to evangelize, offered his sufferings for the Pope and the Church, accepted his death with serenity and joy. I set down the paper and looked again at the body, at Carlo. He was no longer simply the 5 a.m. case, he was Carlo, a boy who had lived 15 years with an intensity that I, at 52, could barely imagine. A boy who had apparently faced his death with more peace than most adults find in their entire lives. And suddenly everything made sense. Not a rational sense, not a sense I could defend in a scientific debate, but a deep, personal sense. What I had felt when touching him wasn't a hallucination, wasn't stress or fatigue. It was real. It was the echo of a life lived with such fullness, with such purpose, with such connection to something greater, that even death couldn't completely erase it. It was as if his body, that biological vehicle that had technically ceased to function, still held the impression of what it had contained, like a room that still smells of flowers that were there, like a cup that still holds the warmth of coffee that has been drunk. I sat on the stool next to the gurney, something I never did during a procedure. I looked at his hands, now crossed over his chest, in the position the family would probably want. I thought about how many bodies I had touched in 27 years, hundreds, thousands, bodies of all ages, all conditions, all stories, and not once had I felt what I felt that morning. I'm not a religious man. I don't go to Mass, I don't pray, I don't think much about God or the soul or life after death. For me, it had always been simple. We live, we die, our bodies decompose, and that's it. There's nothing romantic or spiritual about it. It's biology, it's chemistry, it's physics. But there I was in my preparation room with all my material certainties, suddenly less solid than they had been hours before. It wasn't that I suddenly believed in ghosts or souls floating above bodies. It wasn't anything so dramatic. It was more subtle. It was simply the certainty, inexplicable but absolute, that there was something more, that human life couldn't be completely reduced to biological functions, that there was a dimension that my technical work, no matter how professional, couldn't touch or measure or document. I combed his hair carefully. He had a rebellious cowlick at the crown that made some locks stand up in a curious way. I smoothed it with gel, but then I stopped. I wondered if he would have liked it that way or preferred that slightly disheveled, youthful appearance. I decided to leave it a bit more natural. I wanted him to look as he had been, not like an artificial, too perfect version. I applied a light layer of tinted cream on his face to give him some color. Not much, just enough so he wouldn't look so pale. His cheeks, his forehead, his chin. And as I worked on his face, as my fingers carefully touched his skin to spread the product evenly, I spoke to him. Not out loud, just in my mind. But I spoke to him all the same. I don't know what you were in life, Carlo, I thought. But whatever it was, you left a mark, even on someone like me who only knows you as a body on a gurney. You left a mark. I finished with his face and stepped back. He looked good. He seemed asleep, at peace, serene. It was good work. Objectively speaking, any colleague would have approved, but I knew it wasn't just good technical work, it was something more. I had put into that preparation a care, an attention, a respect that went beyond my usual professionalism. I covered his body with a clean sheet, leaving only his face visible. This was how his family members would see him when they arrived. This was how they would want to say goodbye. I cleaned my instruments, disinfected the surfaces, threw the disposable materials into the appropriate containers, completed my documentation. Start time of procedure, end time, techniques used, state of the body, relevant observations. In the observation section, I hesitated about what I could write. Body presented an unusual quality to the touch. Technician experienced anomalous sensations during preparation. It sounded absurd. Finally, I wrote, body well preserved, preparation completed, no complications. Family may proceed with the viewing. But I kept everything else to myself, what I had felt, what I had experienced, what had changed in me during those hours. These weren't things that could be documented on a medical form. I left the room and removed my protective equipment. It was almost 9 in the morning. My shift had ended. Normally after a procedure, I would simply go home, shower, and try to sleep a few hours before returning at night. But that day I didn't. That day I walked to the hospital chapel. I had never entered there before, not once in 27 years of working at that hospital. I passed in front of it every day, but I had never had a reason to enter. But that morning I did. I pushed the wooden door and entered the small, silent space. There were some benches, a simple altar, a crucifix on the wall. Nothing elaborate, but clean and quiet. I sat on the last bench and simply stayed there, looking ahead, not really knowing what to do or why I was there. I thought about all the times I had felt secure in my materialist understanding of life and death. All the times I had heard family members talk about feeling the presence of their deceased loved ones and had thought with barely disguised condescension that it was just psychological coping mechanisms. All the times I had seen priests bless bodies in my room and had thought it was an empty ritual with no real meaning beyond psychological comfort for believers. And now, I was sitting there in a chapel at 9 in the morning after having touched a body that had made me question everything I thought I knew about the nature of life and death. I didn't experience any sudden conversion, didn't see heavenly lights, didn't hear voices. I didn't leave that chapel converted into a devout believer, but something had changed. A door that had been firmly closed in my mind had cracked open. Just a bit, just enough to let in a current of fresh air. A possibility I had previously completely rejected. I stayed there maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Then I got up and left. I went home, showered but couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment of that morning. The first touch, the sensation of presence, the peace emanating from that body, the inexplicable certainty that I had touched something sacred. If this story has touched your heart in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Has anyone ever made an impact on your life that defied rational explanation? Your experiences enrich our community, and we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to join us on this journey of faith and discovery. Thank you for being here with us today. I returned to the hospital that night for my next shift. I passed in front of the viewing room and saw that Carlo's family had already arrived. There were flowers, candles, people praying. I stayed a moment in the hallway observing from a distance. I saw a woman, probably his mother, leaning over the coffin. I saw a man, probably his father, with a hand on her shoulder. I saw young people his age, friends I suppose, crying and hugging each other, and I thought they knew what I had only touched. They had lived with that light that I had only felt as an echo, And somehow that consoled me, knowing that what I had experienced wasn't an illusion, wasn't an anomaly, but a true reflection of who that boy had been. The following days were strange. I continued with my work normally, preparing other bodies, performing the same technical procedures, but it was no longer the same. Every body I touched, I found myself wondering, who were you? What did you love? What did you care about? They weren't just cases anymore. They were people. They had been people. And although I didn't feel with any of them what I had felt with Carlo, I had developed a new sensitivity, a new way of relating to my work. I began to investigate about him. I read articles online. I discovered his complete story, his devotion to the Eucharist, his project of documenting Eucharistic miracles, his use of technology to evangelize, his love for his family and friends, his acceptance of illness and death. And everything I read resonated with what I had felt that morning in the preparation room. It all fit together. Years later, when the beatification processes began, when Carlo Acutis became international news, when his body was exhumed and found incorrupt, it didn't surprise me at all, because I already knew. I had been the first to touch that body after his death, and even then I had known it was different. I didn't have the theological language to express it at that time. I didn't have the conceptual framework to understand it completely, but I had known. There's something I've never told anyone until now. Something that happened just before taking his body out of the preparation room so that the family could view it. I had approached one last time. I had adjusted the sheet. I had verified that everything was perfect, and then, impulsively, I had done something I had never before done in my professional career. I had placed my hand on his forehead as a father would with a sleeping child, and had whispered, "Thank you." I don't know exactly why I was thanking him. Thank you for what exactly? Maybe for having shown me that there is more in this world than my science could explain. Maybe for having given me in his death a gift that many don't receive in their entire lives, a glimpse of the transcendent. Maybe simply for having been who he was, for having lived with such authenticity that even his lifeless body radiated something of that light. And in that moment, with my hand on his cold forehead, I had felt one last time that presence, that peace. And for an instant, just an instant, I had had the crazy certainty that he had heard me, that somehow from wherever he was, he had received my gratitude and had accepted it with that same jovial serenity with which he had apparently lived his life. Today, so many years later, I still work in the same room at Santa Maria della Misericordia Hospital. I'm still a morgue technician. I still touch cold bodies. I still perform the same procedures I've performed for decades. But I'm no longer the same man I was before that spring morning in April 2006. Now every time I begin a procedure, I take a moment, just a moment, before the first touch, and I think of Carlo. And I remember that every body on my gurney was a person. They lived, loved, suffered, hoped, and deserved to be treated not just with technical professionalism, but with reverence. Because if I learned anything that morning, it's that we are more than flesh and bones, much more. Sometimes on quiet nights when the hospital is almost empty and I'm alone in my room with a body waiting to be prepared, I find myself talking to them silently. I'm not crazy. I know they don't hear me, but I do it anyway. I tell them I'll do my best work, that I'll treat them with dignity, that their families will see them beautiful and at peace. It's my way of honoring what Carlo taught me. Without words, just with his presence. I never became particularly religious. I don't go to Mass regularly, don't pray the Rosary. I didn't become what would be considered a devout Catholic, but I do enter the hospital chapel from time to time. I sit on that same last bench and simply remain there in the silence, open to that dimension of reality that I once literally touched with my hands and that forever changed my way of understanding my work and my life. Blessed Carlo Acutis spent only a few hours under my care. I spent 27 years preparing bodies before meeting him, and many years more after. But those few hours were the most important of my career. They were the moment when the technician touched the sacred, and the sacred, in its silent and powerful way, touched the technician back. If this story has moved your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing testimonies that strengthen our faith and bring us closer to the saints of our time. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What resonated with you most about this experience? Has your faith ever been touched in an unexpected way? Your stories and reflections are a gift to our community. Thank you for joining us today, and may your path be blessed with moments of divine presence, just as mine was on that remarkable spring morning.